The thing that we need to remember in the diet space is it's the most confusing space in the world, right? And everyone likes to see the new thing, right? When in reality, the thing that's worked forever is the thing we should focus on forever. All right, what is up, everybody? Episode 6, The Pursuit of Balance. We're going to talk about how to cycle your calories, right? If you feel like you're someone that's dieting and you're getting stuck in this fat loss journey, this is going to be the episode for you. So this is a conversation that happened from a client a couple weeks ago, and she asked great questions, which I love because the best clients ask the best questions, right? Best employees ask the best questions. But was really from like a weight loss perspective is like, how do I cycle calories, right? Because this idea of maintenance calories and the kind of total amount of calories that we burn, if I'm always eating at a certain amount of calories, don't I have to just keep eating less and less and less to keep losing weight? And the answer is no, but I'm going to explain that with a lot more context today, right? So I wrote down a lot of stuff, but I think where I want to start today's conversation is this idea of in relationship to caloric burn, right? In relationship to caloric deficit, in relationship to losing weight, how do I structure that, right? And it really comes down to like understanding adaptive thermogenesis, right? So what I want to start with is the thermic demand of energy expenditure, right? So we call this the total daily energy expenditure is what they call TDEE, right? Which is basically broken up into 4 things, right? Number 1 is going to be your BMR, your basal metabolic rate, right? Which is the amount of calories every single day at rest. Even if I was in a coma in a hospital bed, I would still be burning this fixed amount of calories, right? Now, if for someone that's at a gym, someone that's functional lifestyles listening to this, there's also, you can see this at the top of your printout sheet for your in-body sheet where it shows you your BMR. I wouldn't know the equation off the top of my head, but also when it comes to actually figuring out calories, it's more accurate to go off of BMR, right, versus total body weight, right? So to give you guys an example, if I wanted to go off fat loss, I would say minimum 10, but I would say about 10 to 14 times my body weight, right? So it's like, for example, it's like if I wanted to lose weight and I'm 200 pounds, if I multiply that by 12, I would need 2,400 calories a day to lose weight. When you think about maintenance, we can go anywhere from like that 12 to 16 range, right? And when I look at surplus or a weight gain goal, it could be 16, 18, 20, sometimes even 22, depending on kind of the activity level. Now, the context of picking out calories is understanding activity level, genetics a little bit, and things like that. So coming back to the total daily energy expenditure is number 1, your BMR, right? This is, like I said, the calories at rest. Number 2 is your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is me sitting here, fidgeting, talking to you guys, keeping my eyes open. Like those are all the little micro habits that you don't even pay attention to that are non-exercise. So me walking around, me training a client, so obviously if you're someone that has a pretty active job or on your feet, your NEAT calories are going to be through the roof, right? And to be honest with you, the biggest thing that we should all be focusing on is improving our NEAT, right? Improving the non-exercise stuff, which is why the importance of setting goals for your steps counts or your walking, because so many people are so sedentary, and that obviously is diminishing a huge chunk of those calorie burn. Third one is going to be the energy activity thermogenesis, exercise activity thermogenesis, which is in the name. It's the exercise you do. So this is the dedicated strength training, the dedicated yoga or runs or bike rides. Obviously when you think about your dedicated forms of exercise, then the fourth and final one is going to be the thermic effect of food, which is understanding that calories are not all created equal. What I mean by that is like 100 calories of a chicken breast, you might burn with protein anywhere from 20 to 30% of those calories just through digestion, right? With carbohydrates, anywhere from 6 to 12% of those calories are going to get burned through digestion. When you think about fat, 3 to 5% of those calories are going to get burned through digestion, right? So when you think about these 4, BMR, non-exercise, exercise, thermic effect of food, these are going to be the things that are going to create up the total amount of calories that you're burning every single day. So just to make math easy, if I'm burning 3,000 calories with all 4 of those areas a day, if I wanted to lose weight, I need to be eating less than that, right? So the first question is kind of asking yourself is like, number 1, I always like to draw the roadmap first. I'm 200. I want to be 180. I need to lose 20 pounds, right? I will always suggest, and I will fight to the grave on this one, that slower is better as far as health and sustainability. Faster is better for the mentality of progress and motivation, right? So there needs to be this balance. But the one thing that I will tell you from my experience with clients from doing this for 17 years, the ones that go really extreme, really fast, really hard, and we see this even sometimes people join the gym like, I just want to go 5 times a week. I just want to lose this weight, and then I'll flatten out. It's like, do the thing that got you there and stay doing that thing, right? So I would suggest that if I can encourage you guys, at most go at a 25% deficit, right? So ideally 10 to 20 kind of being more realistic, right? So meaning if I burning 3,000 calories a day, 10% of that would be 300, 20% of that would be a 600, right? So that means I need to subtract 3 to 600 calories from my diet to lose weight. So if I'm burning 3,000, the extreme version would be 2,400 calories. So 24 to 2,700 calories being my deficit to lose weight, right? We've all heard the golden rule that it's like if I lose 500, or if I take 500 calories away, 3,500 calories equals 1 pound of fat. If I'm sub 500 times 7, I'm losing a pound of fat a week. I think the goal should be about 1% of your body weight per week, right? Meaning it's like if I'm 100 pounds, 1 pound a week. If I'm 200 pounds, 2 pounds a week. Like that's a realistic, healthy goal to shoot for. Anything above that, you're going to go into a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, right? And that's where some of these things I think get a little dangerous and become a slippery slope. And this is where all these rebounding of up and downs come from people over the macro of understand that weight loss is not linear, but there's ways to make it as linear-ish as possible, right? So if I were to zoom out in that graph of the, body weight for somebody and we're doing it the best way, it's pretty much linear, right? Where we get in trouble is because there's so much context, right? So the first thing I want to talk about before I get into some of the details is understand that calorie tracking is not an accurate science, right? And what I mean by that is it's not that calories aren't accurate. Calories are accurate. Tracking calories and the art of it to be perfect with it is almost damn near impossible, right? There is going to be this like margin of error that every single human's going to miss. You go to a restaurant, you have no idea the amount of oil that was cooked in, right? I could take the same 3 eggs on a skillet without any oil or butter, and then I could do the same 3 eggs with a bunch of oil and butter. It would look the same on the plate, but one's going to have a hell of a lot more calories in it and on it, right? So that's where some of this stuff I think requires some context is like, yeah, I think calorie counting is super effective, but yeah, I also think it's probably not the most sustainable route because if you were eating foods the way that Mother Nature gave it to us without any preparation or processing. And what I mean by processing, I'm not just talking about things that are in bags and boxes and things like that. Understand that cooking is a form of processing, right? So, like I mentioned with the eggs, with oil and butter, without oil and butter, two different things, right? As far as calories go. So, if you were eating things that is closest to its natural state, it's really, really hard to screw up a diet, right? Like if you're eating lots of vegetables and lots of fruits in season with both produce, if you're eating lots of animal protein, if you're getting all your fats just from the animal protein, like it's kind of hard to screw up, right? Like you really, and this is something I've always said with fruit. People are like, well, doesn't fruit have sugar? And how many people do you know that are overweight because they've really gone really hard on the blueberries? Like it doesn't exist, right? So understand that the context of like calorie tracking is a very effective tool for the modern day society, meaning because we've done so much processing and we've done so much changing and engineering of the foods that if you want to have some of those things that are quote unquote processed, then you need to be a little bit more of the calorie cycling, right? And the calorie tracking side of things, right? So let's start with the problem with chronic deficits, right? So I wrote down a handful of things. Number one, there is a physiological stress that happens when you're in a deficit. That's just like the first thing to understand. Like it is stressful for the body to be in a deficit, right? Your body physiologically is going, oh shit, I am not getting enough energy in. So what I'm going to do, and this is where adaptive thermogenesis comes in, is I'm going to lower the expenditure. So if I'm burning 3,000 calories a day, but you're giving me 2,000, over time, that 3,000 is actually going to start to change. Your non-exercise and your resting metabolic rate are actually going to start to drop. And even little things that are just unconscious, like the fidgeting that you do, your energy, like just little things that you're never going to notice are going to start to drop. So adaptive thermogenesis is the body's reducing energy output as a survival mechanism, right? So number one, like I said, resting metabolic rate is going to drop. Number two, non-exercise movement is going to drop. Number three, the energy efficiency of exercise is going to go up, meaning it's like your body is actually going to become more efficient at exercise, which is going to actually burn less calories. It sounds backwards, right? Like I'm becoming more efficient at exercise from a caloric burning standpoint, right? And that's your body going, I'm not taking as much in, so my body's natural adaptation is to become more efficient at that. Muscle loss is going to be a huge piece. And this is something I'll talk about a lot with kind of the protein aspect and why resistance training should be the biggest part of your fat loss journey. But muscle itself is a metabolic machinery of the human body. right? When you even think about the basal metabolic rate that I was talking about, people are like, well, how do I improve my basal metabolic rate? And the answer is muscle. Lean body mass is directly correlated with your basal metabolic rate. Meaning, if I had a 200-pound male that's 30% body fat and I had a 200-pound male that's 15% body fat, the 15% body fat guy, he's burning more even though they're exact same weight, right? So understand that muscle is that machinery, right? So meaning less muscle, slower metabolism, which is a higher chance of fat gain. So now let's talk about the hormonal changes, right? So number one, there's one called leptin. Leptin is what we think about as the satiety hormone, right? When we're eating at an extreme deficit or a deficit for a very long period of time, my satiety hormone is going to drop, which is obviously going to make it easier to overeat because you're not as satiated. Number two is going to be ghrelin, which is pretty much the inverse relationship of what leptin does. Leptin is basically going to be the hunger hormone. So when you think about increased appetite and cravings, when ghrelin's up. So two things already that are going to make it psychologically hard for my body to maintain a deficit, right? Because this is where, oh, I could, if you just had more willpower, if you stayed stronger to your diet, the adherence would be better. Adherence makes diets work. But adherence also comes from sustainability and some level of enjoyment, right? Now, don't get me wrong. Any lifestyle change or any change in general, it's not easy, but you need to understand like the goal is to try to make it as sustainable as possible, right? Which basically means I need to input some level of enjoyment so I can actually create adherence for that climb, right? Next one is your thyroid hormones, T3, T4. So these are going to be what we think about as that kind of the metabolic hormones of the body. But when you obviously are reducing thyroid, we're obviously hurting and impacting metabolism a little bit. Sex hormones, so your testosterone and estrogen are going to go down. And then number four, the final one of that part for the hormones is going to be cortisol. Everyone knows cortisol. It's the stress hormone. When I'm not eating enough, my body is stressed. When body's stressed, cortisol goes up, right? There's a lot of little, and I don't know how true or not this is, but even like some people say like, oh, lower belly fat, if someone just carries it there, that could be a lot of cortisol. It's like even where we carry fat can be kind of dictative of the hormones. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but obviously when you think about all cause mortality and all health items, keeping cortisol as low as possible is a very, very important thing. Now, understand that comes from two things. That's physiological and psychological. I could be stressed out about my life, right? What did I talk about the last 2 weeks? Job and, all the status and all these other things that we kind of put on ourselves and make it hard for life to be enjoyable. Those are psychological stresses. And then there's physiological stresses, which is what we're talking about today, which is, hey, I'm not eating enough for what my body needs to thrive, right? So now let's talk about the psychological burnout, right? Food focus goes up, mood goes down. This is probably the most dramatic thing that you see in anybody on a diet, right? It's like when you remove something, you're always thinking about it, right? And what do you think is going to happen to your mood, right? And then life becomes all about macros and all about your willpower, right? So that's something I kind of wrote down is willpower is not something that you can survive on for an extended period of time. There are a few freaks out there that are just sick in the head, and I mean in maybe a borderline healthy or unhealthy way, that can willpower a lot of things in life and get far in life. But for most of us, that's not the case. So those are the negative impacts of me being in a caloric deficit for a very long period of time or, too long of a time. So now let's talk about refeeds, right? Refeeds is what some of us would think about as like cheat meals, right? Like I remember when I did my Men's Physique show, I would have like a weekly cheat meal. And I would always do them on my leg day, right? My coach would be like, okay, leg day or your heaviest energy expenditure day, I want you to do refeed. Refeeds normally are going to come more in the form of carbohydrates, right? Sometimes fats, but mainly more carbohydrates. And I'll speak on why. Because here's one thing to remember. It doesn't matter if I'm losing weight. It doesn't matter if I'm gaining weight or maintaining weight. Protein is not that far off. What I mean by that is like, I should always be eating towards the goal weight that I want to be, right? If I'm 200, I'm eating 180, right? If I'm 180, I want to be 200, I'm eating for a 200-pound person, right? So when you think about protein at a minimum level, at an absolute minimum level is 0.7 to zero point 0.8, right? And where this episode even came from, Shayla, you know who you are, okay? And a lot of clients say this, right? Like this is the limited belief that so many people carry in the gym that it's impossible for me to hit the protein quota without overeating on calories. And the answer is false. If you are super picky about the type of protein you're eating, then yeah, it becomes a little bit harder. If I enjoy ribeyes and fattier cuts of meats, yeah, those come with a lot of calories. But if you're balancing it out with leaner cuts of meats or leaner fishes or poultry or whey protein or just egg whites a little bit more than egg yolks or full eggs, like those type of things. You want to find the balance of optimal health, but also protein. So at a minimum level 0.7, but ideally zero point 0.8 to 1 gram, right? And for me, 1 gram should always be the goal because at the end of the day, goals should be borderline unrealistic, right? So meaning if I'm 200 pounds, I need 200 grams of protein. I will tell you as someone that is a meat eater that loves protein and craves protein, it's not that hard for me to hit protein as long as I'm eating enough meals per day. It's hard for me to get protein if I'm not eating enough meals per day. And that's where some of the meal selection can be important for you. So let's think about refeeds. Let me kind of just write down some of the stuff I wrote down. So refeed, I want you guys to think about this being 1 to 2 days a week, maybe even 1 day a week for some people, right? So it's like if I'm 3,000 calories and I'm eating 2,500 calories, what I would do is 5 days a week or 6 days a week, I would eat 2,500 calories. And then 1 or 2 of those, I would eat at 3,000. I would eat at maintenance, right? And I understand that your maintenance is going to change over time because you're going to lose weight over time. But like that would be a great way for us to kind of have just proper refeeds. And refeeds are a weekly thing. And I'll speak on a diet break in a second. So, number one, you're going to get a bump in your leptin levels, right? So, temporarily restores the hunger signaling, right? And leptin being the satiety signal, right? And this is why carbs are so effective, I think, from a carb cycling perspective. But also just kind of like how I manage refeeds is like, secondly, I think most people crave carbs because that tends to be the easiest kind of lever to remove a little bit sometimes. Now, here's the context and here's the honest answer. If protein is accounted for, it doesn't matter what the split of the carbs and fats are for the rest of your calories, but pick something that's more aligned for your style of eating, right? I think more people in the carnivore space and the keto space are coming out and saying, "Oh, I don't think this is long-term successful for me." And the answer is, yeah, anything with an unbalanced approach is probably not going to be that successful, but everyone likes the new shiny thing. The thing that we need to remember in the diet space is it's the most confusing space in the world, right? And everyone likes to see the new thing, right? When in reality, the thing that's worked forever is the thing we should focus on forever, right? So, number one, you get a bump in your leptin levels. Number two, you're going to replenish the glycogen because obviously being in a deficit or low calories, you're going to obviously burn through your glycogen. So, better training performance, more intensity, and you're going to preserve muscle mass. Number three, you're going to lower cortisol. You got to remember that cortisol, and this is something that's kind of interesting for people that have high cortisol, is they actually encourage you to add a little bit more carbohydrates to the diet, right? Because your body's burning through glycogen with higher stress kind of environments. So, or having a little bit more carbohydrates at your dinner to help you fall asleep with melatonin production, right? So, the relationship between stress and diet, there's a lot of parallels, right? And that's kind of the cool part. So, having more of these carbohydrates or having a little bit more of these calories is actually going to help reduce the cortisol levels in the body, right? And then most importantly is can reduce the feelings of restriction, right? So better adherence to a deficit long term comes from having some balance, right? And to be honest with you, I'll give you kind of my life story on this one. I tend to just have days where I eat more. And I tend to have days where I barely eat at all, right? Like yesterday, I didn't really eat much at all. I didn't have a breakfast. I had some barbecue and pretty much ate just a little bit of beans and a bunch of protein. And then I got home and I had like 3 eggs and some bacon, right? Which for some people might feel like a lot, but for me, it's like as a borderline 200-pound male that's very active, it's not a lot of food. Then there's some days I feel like I just can't stop eating. Nutrient selection and food selection really is the thing that I think dictates the most that for me. Meaning, like if I'm having a lot of carbs, if I'm having a lot of processed foods, if I'm having a lot of like sugar, I don't really have the same satiety signal, and it's just very easy for me to overeat. This is something where actually kind of a little bit of a segue, but even with my nephew, we were watching. His mom knows this the best, but it's like if he eats a bunch of sugar and carbs and candy, even his mood's different, right? So we want to do things that make the adherence easy, right? And this is where not only just like the benefit of doing it so you can actually have sustainable fat loss, but also somewhat enjoy it. So I think like having those little refeeds throughout the week, but this is where like adding those carbs back into it. So like I said, 1 or 2 times a week, focus on carbs, moderate protein, minimally added fat. Fat could be something that could be a little bit of an exchange with carbohydrates, but I will tell you is if you look at nature, the only fat that came from food that came from planet Earth was from the animal protein itself or little things like avocado or nuts and seeds. So fat should be something that we're not really trying to get a lot of, right? Like if you're having more than 30% of your calories coming from fat, you're borderline kind of taking this as a keto approach. So I would say for the most part, keep it pretty minimal and let the fat just come organically from the foods that you're eating, like when you're prioritizing your protein or when you're prioritizing produce like avocado, little nuts and seeds, things like that. So calories go back to maintenance. And they actually did a cool little study on this, and it was basically talking about like for someone that had diet breaks or sorry, refeeds kind of built in versus a 16-week straight deficit, the person that had the diet breaks weekly actually had more weight loss and more fat loss over the course of that 60-week study, which was pretty cool because like a lot of us would think that just like, yeah, stay in a deficit and I'm just going to keep losing weight. But it goes to show you the psychological, the physiological, and the hormonal changes and the impact they make on the effectiveness of fat loss, right? So now let's talk about diet breaks, right? So diet breaks are, I want you to think about this being almost 1 to 2 weeks at a time, right? So, and I kind of wrote down a little bit of a timeline, but then I was like, I kind of erased it as I was typing it of like, maybe we don't need to talk about this as much because I don't want to give you guys a super strict structure because people think this is the only way it works. You need to find something that works for you, right? A lot of finding maintenance and finding deficit is trial and error. Even as a coach, like I can give you the MyFitnessPal version of it. I can give you the InBody version of it. I can chat GPT it for you. We can look at all these different numbers it's going to shoot out. What we need to do is give you a fixed amount of numbers, hopefully be it as accurate as possible with our calorie tracking, and then measure against that. And if you see weight loss, we're in a deficit. If we stop seeing weight loss, we might be plateauing. If we never saw weight loss, we're eating at maintenance. If we gain, like just use those things. And that's where I think the frequency of tracking kind of matters depending on kind of the state you are. Right now, not really in a strong state of me caring about weight or body fat as much. I'm kind of just like, this year with wedding and opening up Palo Alto and vacations and honeymoon coming up, I just kind of been living it up. As long as my training's good. My my wife was saying this a couple weeks ago in Tahoe. She was like, I feel like sometimes you're a little hard on yourself when it comes to like how you view your body, right? And body image. And I was like, well, one thing I will say, most coaches and trainers have body image issues. I don't have an issue with it. I just have a very high standard for me, right? And so this conversation got brought up because I was like, I don't really want to eat. I'm not gonna have that. I was like, I'm just gonna get some protein. And something I always try to do is like when I have like let's say I had steak, shrimp, mashed potatoes, and some asparagus. Right, it's one of my favorite meals. I would eat most of the steak and shrimp and the asparagus first, then I would finish with the potatoes last, right? So I always try to like leave the like quote unquote emptier calories or the less nutrient dense calories towards the end of my meal. But I go through these like little cycles too. So like understand like your body's gonna go through seasons of being strict, it's gonna go through seasons of not being so strict. But when it comes to the structure of like how do I go through a weight loss journey, I would say, hey, go 4 weeks of eating at a deficit. And out of those 4 weeks, every day or 2 days a week, or 1 day a week to 2 days a week, you're going to give yourself a little bit of a refeed, right? And once you think about refeed, calories go up, carbs go up, things like that. But then 1 week after 4, go through what we call a diet break, which is a whole week at maintenance again, right? And then what we'll do is we're going to kind of, and this is where it's not a perfect science, but increasing the calories is going to help with the hormonal side. It's going to help with the metabolic side a little bit, right? It's just going to kind of bring things back up because the adaptive thermogenesis that I'm talking about is the problem that most people run into and why they plateau with fat loss. So the diet break is basically going to be like, okay, this is going to be a week at maintenance or 2 weeks at maintenance, depending on how strong you're kind of doing this. So in like the men's physique bodybuilding world, we used to call this reverse dieting, which is basically like sometimes, and I wouldn't say sometimes, you see this a lot with like the men's physique, figure competitions, bodybuilding, where you go through, and this is an extreme variation that most of you probably will never do and should never do, that going through such an extreme deficit to look as lean as possible. And I always say the leanest I ever been was my last show 8 years ago, right? And it's the last time I've ever trained for anything like that, but I was just shy of 4% body fat. Oh, I mean, like my skin was paper. Don't get me wrong, I loved the way I look. I wish, like now I'm like 13, 14%. I really need to get my shit together. I personally like to be like 8 to 12 is kind of like an operating level, or 10 to 12 being more realistic. But like metabolically, it's very, very demanding. Number two, the adherence, being able to sustain that. I mean, you don't have a lifestyle. I can't eat the shit that I want to. I can't drink wine every day like I like to. Like those type of things gonna lose it. So let's talk about diet breaks, right? What is a diet break? It's not a cheat. It's a structured phase of eating and maintenance, right? Which is basically to help your body. It's not going to prevent your body from losing weight. It's not going to even necessarily, hopefully, gain any weight, but it's just going to allow your body to kind of hormonally take a kind of jump in the right direction, right? So physiological benefits, like we talked about, thyroid hormones, T3, T4, brings those back up, raises leptin, like we talked about with, again, the same thing, lowers cortisol. Exact same things that you would see from a hormonal perspective, just more dramatic, right? What I mean by that is a refeed and a diet break are technically the same science. Refeed is just going to be a short period of time, 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 1 meal a week, things like that, depending on how extreme you want to be. And a diet break is going to be something where I'm going to do from 5 days, 10 days, 15 days at a time. And I generally would do it like once a month, once every 6 weeks, depending on how extreme you're being with that, right? So it's going to help with fat loss. It's going to obviously restore the muscle preservation side of things, right? And like I said, every 4 to 8 weeks, we're going to be using that. So now the big picture is calorie cycling and phased fat loss. Your metabolism isn't broken, it's adaptive. So you need to just be adaptive on how you diet, right? I love this quote when I was looking up stuff, right? And that quote basically means that like a lot of people think about, like I mentioned earlier, it being linear, right? Like it's just I stay at a deficit and I lose weight the rest of my life, right? And unfortunately, that's what makes things hard is because it's not how the human body works. The human body is very, very adaptive to what you provide it, right? So when you think about how do you cycle your calories, I want you guys to think about this in cycles, right? Because that's where the whole word of calorie cycling comes from, right? So, whatever your goal is, my biggest piece of advice is pick something that's intense enough to see some results so you can actually start to lose weight so you can take advantage of the psychological hack of a little bit of a dopamine hit, because remember, dopamine comes from the pursuit, not from the reach, meaning it's like once you get there, that's not where you get the dopamine rush, it's once you pursue it, right? So I think having some success and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel is something that's going to create better adherence because you're psychologically excited about what you're chasing. Number two is you want to make sure the deficit's not so strong, because even though a deficit might be strong and good for results in the short term, it's going to be much harder to be cycling through maintenance and the balance of it. And this is where we see a lot of rebounding, right? Because put it this way, if you ate at a deficit for 4 weeks, and then 8 weeks, and then 12 weeks, and then 16 weeks for a very long period of time, it's going to take you so little of calories or so much activity to actually see success with weight loss that there's no way in hell that you would be able to adhere it, right? The one thing that I will say is kind of like the little closing items for this, right? Of like teaching you guys how to properly do this is like, number one, the biggest priority should be resistance training, right? Because the preservation of muscle mass metabolically is going to help you out. Because building the muscle is the metabolic machinery for it, right? So it allows your body basically to work harder for you. So think about it this way. Lean body mass is kind of like passive income. It's the amount of calories your body's going to burn every day at rest, right? Which is kind of what I call BMR, but in relationship to your lean body mass. So you want to really focus on preserving and, if not more importantly, building lean body mass. Now, when you're in a weight loss journey, you need to remember that come to the consensus that you are going to lose some lean mass, right? When you're at too much of a deficit for too long or too extreme, your body's also going to burn a lot of lean mass in that process of weight loss. The goal is to optimize fat loss, right? Which is why the cycling is so important, because it allows us to kind of have periods of deficit, becoming really efficient and using fat for a fuel source, and then maintenance for 1 day a week or maintenance for 1 week every month, right? Things like that. So it allows us to have these periods of giving the muscle a little bit more of an opportunity to actually preserve itself. But then also the signaling from the gym is the thing that's going to allow you to actually build muscle through resistance training, right? Number two is you got to understand the importance of movement. This is the biggest mistake I see with the modern day human, especially since the pandemic. You can go to the gym and have the best workout with your trainer, the class that you're taking 2 days a week, 3 days a week, even 4 days a week for some, right? I will say one of the biggest mistakes I see clients make still to this day with someone that has 700 clients in their gyms. More people go 2 times a week and barely even 3 times a week than they should be doing 3 or 4, right? Because you're giving yourself 2 days of input and 5 days of nothing. And then the kind of follow-up part to what I was talking about is like, if you go home and you sit on your ass behind a computer all day or driving a car, taking your kids to school or sports, watching TV at night, sitting down at the dinner table, laying in bed for 6, 8, 10 hours a day, you're not moving that much, right? And you got to remember that non-exercise activity is technically above exercise activity, meaning we burn more calories with the non-exercise stuff. And it's probably changing for some people because you're so sedentary. But also, when you think about blood sugar regulation, when you think about, helping with digestion, movement is that thing. When you think about the lymphatic system, it doesn't have a heart that pumps out blood. Your pump is movement and is muscle contraction. So the idea of movement, not only from a mobility perspective or digestion perspective or a blood sugar perspective, but more importantly from a weight loss perspective, because movement is the thing that is aerobic. It is low zone work, meaning when your body's at a very low zone of training, zone 1, zone 2, and parts of zone 3, your body's using fat as a fuel source, right? When you get to zone 4, zone 5, where it becomes more glycolytic, your body's using more carbs, it's using more lean tissue sometimes to then break down some of the things that it needs, right? So this is where when you think about the type of activity, the diets, the breakdown composition of those macros, the nutrients that we're getting and the hormones behind it, that's kind of really going to tell your body what actually it wants to use as a fuel source. And this is for me why I think like the carb cycling and where keto obviously has a lot of power in too, is keto when people go, oh, I'm burning more burning more fat calories when I'm on keto. And it's like, well, duh, you're eating 40%, 50% of your diet's coming from fat. If I'm eating somebody with 15% fat, that's like, of course, I'm going to burn less fat. But it is teaching our body metabolically how to use fatty acids and ketones as an energy source versus just depending on carbs and glucose. But no matter what, there needs to be this balance between both. We want our body to be metabolically flexible, which means if I give it carbohydrates, use that as a fuel source. If I don't give you carbohydrates and I've been fasting for a while, or I haven't done it because I'm keto for a while, then yeah, I want you to use fat, right? But I ideally would like you to use the fat that's stored. So when you think about how do I get my body to use the fat that's stored, that's where some of this kind of like fasting. Fasting is something I will say is probably a sensitive subject. And what I mean by sensitive subject, not sensitive on the discussion aspect of it, sensitive on how it's used. I have a client, I'll give you a very extreme example. This was probably 2018, 2019, first couple of years of the gym. Bigger guy, and he was probably high 200s, and he would do alternate day fasting. One day, eat normal. One day, no food at all. Just water and coffee or tea, whatever he was doing. And he lost an incredible amount of weight and somehow had a lot of muscle mass to begin with, right? But when you look at a man versus a woman, when you think about the lean body tissue aspect of it, when you think about the hormonal side of it, you need to be more aware and careful of how you approach that as a female, right? So fasting is an incredible tool to use because it's going to give your body the ability to go without. And when your body goes with the ability without food, it figures out ways to burn without it, right? So that ideally is going to come from what's stored. But just like a caloric deficit, fasting, and this is where Shyla again sent me this podcast, and they were talking about that, like, well, the dangers of fasting. I would put the dangers of fasting for a female as the same dangers as a deficit. When you're putting your body at such an extreme deficit or such extreme period or window of fasting, they're basically doing the same thing, right? You're stressing your body out, right? We don't want to stress the body out. We want to keep the body as parasympathetic as possible because the rest and digest phase of the human body comes from being in that state. So same conversation with fasting is I think you can use fasting as a tool. I think you can use a caloric deficit as a strategy. I think you can use keto as a tool. Like I think all these things are tools and strategy. And I think like different tools for different jobs, but I also think most importantly is cycle between these things, because when you have enough resistance training, ideally minimum 3 times a week, but 3 to 4 being the sweet spot, when you have enough movement on my feet, an hour outside minimum a day, 8,000, 10,000 steps minimum a day, then your body fundamentally is in a good place. And then hopefully we're sleeping and we're managing stress well enough where hormonally my body can do what it needs to do, right? Your body is putting fat on as a defensive mechanism, right? It's basically saying, oh, like if you were to think about this 1,000 years ago, we would generally fatten up during the summertime, right? Depending on the climate you lived. But if I were to live here, if I were to live Northern California, if I were to live in Alaska, my body would put a bunch of weight on during the summer to fatten up for the winter because then I would hibernate in the winter. If I lived in Costa Rica when I'm next to the equator, yeah, I'm eating the same year round. So understand there's so much context to geography. There's so much context to movement. There's context to genetics. Genetics is the one thing that I will argue is this probably the dumbest thing to focus on, because complaining about your genetics is complaining on something you can never control. So don't complain on the thing that you can't control. Complain or focus on the thing you can't control. Second part of the control items is you can't complain about the problem and the solution, right? If you want to look really good, understand that there's sacrifice on your lifestyle and your living and your eating. If you don't really care about that, you have more flexibility. Second thing, if you are very active, if you're younger, if you're good genetics, then yeah, you can get away with having more flexibility on the diet. If you're someone that doesn't have good genetics or is not very active or is not young or whatever it might be, whatever kind of the excuse we like to use, then you need to be more strict on the calorie side of it. So for me, this is the kind of the same way I love to look at finances is you can either learn how to save a bunch of money to obviously live below your means, or you can learn to make a bunch of money where you don't give a shit about the price. I am someone that likes to be on the offense side. I'd rather focus on making money. I'd rather focus on being active. So I don't need to worry about saving as much or reducing calories as much. You still need to be aware. Obviously, like the beauty is in the balance, pursuit of balance. But like, just remember those things when you guys are looking at fat loss, right? So hope you guys enjoyed that one. Hopefully it gives you some tips, and maybe we'll follow up next week with some more nutrition. Talk to you soon.